Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Efkan Nifty. I'm the CEO of the Caspian Policy Center. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our celebration of 30 years of U.S. Caspian diplomatic relations. At the CPC, we are honored to host all of you here today. We have always prioritized bringing together the Caspian and U.S. policymaking, academic and business worlds, and this event celebrates the region's historic cooperation with Washington. The day will be split into two parts. In the first half of the day, we'll host two panels, one focused on energy and infrastructure connectivity, and one focused on food security in the Caspian region. These issues have always been of great importance both in the United States and the Caspian region, but now, with Putin's invasion of Ukraine, these topics are especially meaningful. Then in the evening, we have a gala with speeches from distinguished guests and ambassadors from the region. Once again, I'd like to welcome everyone here. I'd like to welcome our guests and thank our sponsors, BP, Turkish Airlines, and Chevron, our partners in the U.S. government, the Embassy of Azerbaijan, the Embassy of Georgia, the Embassy of Kazakhstan, the Embassy of Kyrgyz Republic, the Embassy of Turkmenistan, the Embassy of Turkey, the Embassy of Uzbekistan, and of course, all of you for coming here. A special welcome should be given to our esteemed speakers. Their participation embodies U.S. Caspian cooperation, and I'm eager to hear what they have to say. I'm delighted to introduce our keynote speaker today, Amos Hochstein. Amos has held senior positions in the State Department, academia, and the private sector. He previously served as Special Envoy and Coordinator for International Affairs, Energy Affairs, and led Bureau of Energy Resources at the U.S. Department of State. His impressive career keeps him busy, but I'm glad to have him here. So we really appreciate his presence. With this, I'd like to turn the floor to him. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and apologies for keeping everybody waiting and for being delayed. Part of the unpleasant part of being in government, where you're, no matter who you are, except for one guy, you're never really in charge of your own schedule or of events. So apologies again. But again, I'm really glad to be here and joining again Ambassador Sakuda, who I've had the chance to work with as both a colleague at the State Department and when he was ambassador in Azerbaijan. And so great to see what you've been able to accomplish here at this as we move on to these important issues. We're celebrating 30 years of U.S. Caspian relations, and I can't think of a more critical time to be able to have a conversation and take stock of that relationship. And you just mentioned the different topics that you're going to be covering. All of them are critical. But as you mentioned, we stand here today, in between two eras at the beginning of this process in 1991 of where the world was and the countries of the Caspian achieving independence and freedom. And now we're here in 2022, and we are questioning where this region, with a broader region, even beyond Caspian, is going when it comes to questions of freedom and independence. And the idea that countries would be able to choose their own destiny and their own path is challenged and questioned. And the conflict that we are seeing erupting and engulfed in Ukraine is obviously today still contained to Ukraine. But the threat is far greater than just in Ukraine. The threat is the very concept of countries being able to, or determining that they can make choices for the freedom and independence and the mere existence of other countries. And that, to me, just underscores the critical importance of the relationship between the Caspian region and the United States and the international community. And when it comes to infrastructure, this region has some of the most complex and most impressive infrastructure projects that have supported the rest of the world. Pipelines that go from across each other and to the global markets. And this region's importance to the global market and to the global economy has only grown with time. And that too today is under challenge, because as we see what's playing out, as the war between Russia and Ukraine deepens, the reaction to it also has to do with how do we question and how do we evaluate the current infrastructure system that the world knows and has come to rely on for the last 30 years, and question whether or not that is enough. Is that going to be the infrastructure set that will support the global economy, or will that actually become the weak spot and the weak link in our global economy? And I know that I'm expanding beyond the Caspian here, but the Caspian is part of the answer to the challenges that we are seeing. So the importance for the United States is to maintain, and not just maintain, but to maintain, build, strengthen the relationship between our bilateral relationships with each of these countries, as well as with the region as a whole. And to do that, we need to do a lot more as the United States to broaden that relationship. But I think it also is time for the region itself to start coming together and using the force of the relationships with each other, of building and strengthening the relationships among the Caspian nations, and to be able to draw and look at the natural resources and capabilities that each country has, and to see how do we take advantage of those in a combined way. Because if you only look at what each country has and therefore develop the infrastructure that that country wants to have in order to get it out to market or to benefit, that's a limiting factor. But if countries start saying, I need to build kind of infrastructure that builds on the strengths of each of the countries and builds the kind of infrastructure that interconnects those, then it doesn't only strengthen the economy of each of the countries individually, but it strengthens the region as a whole and supports the global economy and the global geopolitical position between the international community and the region. And for too long, I think we have been on a slow roll and slow burn of trying to get certain projects approved between countries. The Caspian should be much more interconnected and integrated than it is today. And, you know, I left government on a certain date in January 2017, and when I came back, some of the things that we talked about when it comes to integration in the region, we're still talking about them. And that's a problem. Now, I think that we were in the place in the world that we were living in, that was manageable. But I think today we're in a crisis point that what we do today should be seen as an opportunity. But it's also a call for action so that we get through this crisis in a stronger position, defending the individual rights of each country, and defending and becoming a resource for the rest of the world. And I think there are projects that we can do, the kinds of political integration, and we have, and not just economic, but political integration, those projects are doable. And I think the United States, I believe strongly the United States is going to be there to support it if the will is there. So today, as we celebrate 30 years of independence, of this relationship, I think we have to look at it instead of just in celebration of the 30 years, we have to look at this as the critical moment that we live in. These are dangerous times for democracy and for freedom. And I think that if we look at what has happened just over the last couple of months of this war, and where we were 6 months ago compared to today, when we think about the threat to democracy, there was a certain notion out there that freedom was on the decline, that independence was on the decline. But I think that is not the case anymore. The world has come together. And I think that this is a moment for us to be able to work together, the region and the United States, the region and the European Union, and the region together with the US and the EU at the same time, to see how can we support the growth the integration, the political interconnection, that will then follow with economic integration, economic interconnection. And the Caspian should be seen as a place of connection between East and West, between North and South. I think that is what we can achieve if we continue that. Now, what do we need to do that? I think that we haven't done enough. We, the United States, have not done enough to put the relationship, again, on a both bilateral with each country as well as with the region on the front burner. And I think we need to, as the United States, to increase and elevate. And I think we're going to see that in the coming days, weeks, and months. I think there's going to be a concerted effort to put an emphasis on the relationship and to increase the visibility of our relationship. And that's on us that we haven't done, that it took a crisis for us to elevate our level of integration and cooperation. But I think I would like to use that opportunity as we are going to lift the U.S. participation in the region to see that matched by the interest and the understanding of the state of urgency that we are in by each country in the region. And I think this center here in Washington can and should, and I know you want to, play a critical role in encouraging exactly that kind of approach between the United States and the region. We have companies that are, some sitting in this room, U.S. companies, European companies that are active throughout the region. And I think that we can work together, the governments as well as the companies, in concerted effort to bring about a roadmap of what would it take to get the diplomatic relationship between the countries strengthened, and using the company resources of what they're willing to do, together with our willingness to support it, to bring about real change, so that when we come back and have this conference next year, we can talk about things that we've achieved and changed, rather than just what we've talked about over the last year. Because I think the time for talking is behind us. This has to be a time as a call for action in the region and between us. And I want to add one thing on what I think this means as far as time, because we talk about a lot in the context of the region, the energy clearly plays such an outsized role in this region. But when this region interconnects with itself, it doesn't only then support the international economy by delivering more product. It also then means that countries can use less of their own product in their own economy. It increases the efficiency, which then, of course, supports the global economy, because you get more product to the economy, to the global economy. And that's where you don't only invest in the oil and gas, the investment has to come also in some of the countries in the region that have tremendous hydropower that is underinvested and could produce a lot more electricity, but it's currently contained in the country where the hydropower is produced. But those are electricity lines of green energy, of clean energy, that can be shared across the region. This is not a region that should be afraid of the energy transition. In fact, this is the moment to start utilizing the energy expertise and the energy know-how to be part of that energy transition, to invest in cleaner energy resources and renewable energy and clean technology. Because the energy transition is not something that means that from today to tomorrow it takes place in the next, not even in the next decade. But as we advance through it, being able to produce more of the energy needs in each country from renewable sources will allow you to finance that by selling more of that product on the international markets. If you're selling more oil and gas as we are going to the energy transition and being able to satisfy more and more of energy needs in each country through renewable sources and cleaner technology and efficiency, again, that supports economic security, political security, and the diplomatic relationship, supports the diplomatic relationship with the rest of the world, while at the same time recognizing that the transition is actually happening. It may happen slower than some predict, And we're not going to be reducing demand for gas in Europe or around the world by 2025 or 2030, surely not. And in fact, we're probably going to be increasing demand for gas, especially for non-Russian sources of gas. So this is a great opportunity for the region. But even if it's slower, it is definitely on an unmistakable path. And therefore, the year, whether or not the year is 2030 or the year is 2040, beginning that process of preparedness should start now. So the region has benefited from its natural resources, but it has more natural resources to benefit from and can adopt, because of its expertise, it has the workforce, the knowledge of how energy systems work, to be able to take advantage of that and be preparing for the latter part of the 21st century energy picture, while still supplying the early part of the 21st century's energy transition. Those two are not a zero-sum game. That is possible and doable to do both of them at the same time. So I'll conclude by saying, just repeating what I believe to be the most critical points. I don't have to lecture anybody in this room about what's the moment in history that we're living in the world and how relevant that threat is in this region. I want to be able to come back, if you'll have me back, in a year from now, and to be able to look back and say, we, the United States, lived up to what we said we would do, which is to increase our engagement and involvement in the region, that we have achieved real progress in trans-Caspian and cross-Caspian relationships, political relationships among countries, and that has yielded a more secure, more efficient, and more strategic infrastructure and economic integration in the region and with the rest of the world. Thank you, and I hope the conference goes well.
All right, well, thank you all very much. I appreciate, again, sort of flexibility on scheduling, but this is part of the sort of reemergence of live events. We're not on Zoom. The one advantage is at no point in the conversation will someone have to say, please unmute yourself. But we can do that just to keep our skills up. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bob Secuta, former ambassador to Azerbaijan, former principal deputy assistant secretary of energy at the State Department. And I want to welcome all of you here. We've got a great panel here this afternoon, experts from companies, from the government, from one of the critical consumers and producers in the region. But maybe just in terms of some opening remarks before I turn the floor over to Deputy Assistant Secretary Lachman. Since the second half of the 19th century, and perhaps even before that, energy extraction and sales have really been an important part of the Caspian Basin's economy and the role the region plays in the world. One of the reasons that Stalingrad was so important, because if it had fallen, Moscow would have lost access to the oil from the Caspian. Caspian oil was also one of the goals of Hitler's invasion of Russia. But it's more than just the hydrocarbons themselves. The region has been a center for technological developments in the industry, including the first oil pipeline, the first tanker, the first offshore drilling platforms. With the fall of the Soviet Union, as they're building on, again, what Amos was just talking about, the region, again, had global attention as an energy hub. Azerbaijan was contract of the century in development of the ACG fields, as well as the Shah Deniz 2 project and the Southern Gas Corridor. Kazakhstan with Kashagan and the other projects have been going on there. Turkmenistan, which is the fourth largest natural gas reserves in the world, and really an important producer of NGLs, and also has potential to produce so much more. Uzbekistan, which doesn't get much attention, I think, sometimes in the US on this front, but is also an important oil and natural gas producer. But it isn't just hydrocarbons. Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Georgia have important hydropower. Armenia has just signed an agreement with the United States to cooperate on civil nuclear power. And there's tremendous potential for solar and wind, as we found when we did a report on that back in 2020. But again, sort of building on Amos, energy is very much back in the headlines today because of the need to address climate change, the rising demand for energy in China and other emerging market, developing market countries, the prices for oil and natural gas and their knock-on effects, and of course, because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the need to move away from Russian hydrocarbons. So with that, I'd like to sort of turn the floor over to Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Energy Diplomacy, Laura Lockman.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you for having me, Ambassador Sakuda, Mr. Nifty. Very wonderful to be here with you all today. And an honor to celebrate 30 years of U.S. relations with Caspian states. And as we've all said, this discussion on energy and infrastructure, it's always been important, but even more critical these days. And to quote Amos, it's a critical moment we live in. And you'll hear that my remarks are somewhat reminiscent of Amos's, which I think should be comforting to everyone. The two U.S. government officials are somewhat on the same wavelength. So I lead the energy diplomacy team at the Department of State, and strengthening our energy ties with the Caspian is one of our priorities in my bureau. And as part of this administration's efforts to bolster our energy security and that of our friends and partners, we're working to improve the region's interconnectedness and to avoid dependence on any single country for trade and development. Countries must have the freedom to choose from a variety of options and partners in pursuing their national energy interests. Energy security is national security. And President Putin's war of choice has had worldwide effects, not least on energy supplies. We see this situation as presenting short-term and long-term challenges, as well as opportunities, as a couple of us have said. And the opportunity is for strengthening our partnerships throughout Europe and across the wider region to reap economic and environmental benefits from new technologies. The Caspian region has always played an important role in European energy security. And this partnership is all the more critical as Europe works to reduce its dependence on Russian fossil fuels. While emphasizing the need to meet current energy supply challenges, the Biden administration has also been consistent in its commitment to tackle the climate crisis, both at home and abroad. And as Amos said, we don't see a conflict between this commitment and increasing energy security. By investing in innovation and accelerated technology development, we believe emissions reduction and energy security are both achievable. Part of managing this transition effectively means ensuring access to needed energy to keep the lights on, keep houses warm, businesses running, people in school. And that will require continued, although diminishing, use of oil and gas in the energy mix. At the same time, we need to reduce the emissions intensity of the fuels that we use during this transition. Part of this, and in fuel exporting Caspian countries, is attracting investment, enabling technological improvements to minimize emissions in the production process. These include reducing methane emissions from leaks and venting, and reducing gas flaring. This effort is consistent with and contributes to our clean energy transition goals. In the medium to long term, we want to work with countries in the region on strategies to develop a reliable mix of energy sources that also meets our necessary climate goals. This means embracing the opportunities of low and zero carbon technologies, including renewables, flare capture and methane controls, carbon capture and storage, clean hydrogen, among others. These technologies are ambitious, but they also offer benefits, including economic opportunities. I note that methane and flaring reduction, again, this echoes something that Amos said, can also directly contribute to global gas supplies at existing levels of production, simply by capturing gas currently being wasted across the supply chain. The Caspian region had led a previous energy revolution over 100 years ago and now has enormous potential for developing alternatives to oil and gas. As we know, hydropower, solar energy, and wind are particularly good options, as already demonstrated in the Caspian countries. Renewable energy can help meet growing energy demand domestically, reduce prices, and strengthen regional connectivity, increasing the resilience of the region, not just Caspian, but broader into Europe. So we're enthusiastic about the avenues of partnership we can explore in the growing field of clean energy and methane mitigation, and welcome initiatives taking place in the Caspian to meet climate goals. This moment's an opportunity, as we've said, to simultaneously advance energy security, diversification, and the clean energy transition. I'll close by saying that the United States takes its relationship with the Caspian states very seriously, and as Amos suggested, we would very much like to deepen that relationship, and now is a great time to be doing that. So thank you once again for having me here today, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Laura. And if I can turn over now to Bob Scher, who's Head of International Affairs at BP America.
Great. Nobody has to say, go off mute. On the other hand, the organizers don't have the ability to mute everybody, so we'll see where the balance comes in this. Obviously, want to thank the organizers, Bob. All of us are happy to be here and happy to be here in person, I think. I do note, however, this is not the first time I've been asked to talk about the importance of the Caspian resources on a panel such as this. I suspect that has something to do with the 30-year history that BP has in the region, marking exactly the same 30 years of Trans-Caspian cooperation with the U.S. We obviously have large, huge fields that we operate, ACG and Shah Deniz. In the past, as I looked at my remarks, we talked about efforts to connect these fields to markets, and through 3 export pipelines connecting to the Black Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and Western Europe directly. We've talked about the engineering and the political feat of successfully being able to build the Southern Gas Corridor, over 3,500 kilometers, 7 nations, 11 buyers, up to 16 BCM of gas. So I don't want to do that again. Thank you. But you might ask, well then, okay, what's next? I think, first of all, that recent events that we have talked to and referenced show that we sort of do deserve to be proud of what we accomplished and the vision involved in getting Caspian energy safely and efficiently to the world and to Europe in particular through the Southern Gas Corridor. And there are many people in this room, some up here, some there, and many others who are a huge part of that. So, I think folks were right then. And that has really been proven, and it's a great thing to be able to note, although a terrible reason for which that we have to note it. Secondly, I think we also have to be careful about resting on our laurels and saying that that's all the success that we had and all that we need. The world does still need hydrocarbons, and for now, at least, and we have seen that very clearly. But just as clearly, we all understand that the world has a limited carbon budget, and we must transition to lower and no carbon options. We need to start that now. Yes, we still have a premium on hydrocarbons now, as has been mentioned, but we need to start the transition now, and we can and we will do that in the Caspian region. And what has allowed us to be successful, I believe, is what will ensure success that we all look to achieve into the future for the transition and for our climate goals. So what I believe is that we can and we must do both. And Amos talked about this, but this is also very much where BP and I think where all of us need to be, is that this is an and proposition, not an or proposition. We must continue to safely and effectively produce hydrocarbons and deal with the issues of those hydrocarbons, such as methane leakage, or in BP, I'm forced to say methane leakage. That is what we call performing in BP, while we transform. We have to transform our business in BP so that we can reach our ambition to be a net zero company by 2050 or sooner. And we plan as well within that to see what we can do to help the world get there. And that's part of what we see as the great opportunity in the Caspian. So I want to come back. It's an and proposition, not an or proposition. We have to perform while we transform. And while that may be the catchphrase we use in BP, it seems utterly and truly important for how we think about the Caspian. I believe that the region wants this as well. And just a few examples. Azerbaijan is committed to diversifying from oil and gas and with a commitment to 40% of greenhouse gas emissions, reduce 40% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. I apologize to my panelists. I'm often on the end, and I'm stealing some good stats from them, so I apologize. And hopefully I get it right, or he allows me to think I did. There's also a commitment that 30% of power generation will come from renewables by 2030. Georgia is looking at 1.5 gigawatts of onshore wind and 500 megawatts of solar to add to their already impressive complement of no-carbon energy. And we see huge potential for solar power generation in Turkey as the government continues to ramp up opportunities and sales in this area. And those are just 3 examples of what's going on in the region. This will not be easy. Transitioning rarely is, and we all can see the evidence of this in the world around us, however, that we must act now and we must act quickly. And this is really why I see so much hope and have so much hope and promise for this region. Because together, we have worked hard and tackled tough problems in the past. And together, we have overcome these hard problems. Again, it seems obvious now, but the Southern Gas Corridor didn't seem obvious at the time. It was an engineering marvel, it was a political marvel. We've overcome tough challenges in the past. We have another tough one to overcome now, but we can do it. So in fact, I looked back again at the remarks that I've made at conferences like this before to see some reassurance about what it takes to tackle tough problems and why I think we've been able to do so in this region. So what I said a couple times ago, I'm going to repeat. And I have to be personally proud that I could find my notes from that many years ago. What were the stories of success? 1, technical expertise. And in this transition, we do know what we're doing. We understand the technology. It is difficult, as you said. It is sometimes new. It's on the cutting edge, but we know we have this. We have the technical expertise. 2, we have a business case. We in BP and private companies are not going to do things for altruistic reasons. That's not how we operate and why. But you know something? There is a business case, and nobody should think that there isn't. And we have committed to that, as have many other companies around the world. I will also note that governments have a role to help with this business case in the Caspian, in integration. And it's a charge, I think, to all of us to see where that can help, because you're going to need that business case along with the technical expertise. Public-private cooperation, a key to all we've achieved in terms of integration and energy issues here in the Caspian region, and that's going to continue to be important. Clear goals and a mission, and we couldn't have a clearer set of goals to deal with the limited carbon budget that we have in the world and climate change all around us. We all see it every day and understand that this is critical to our planet. And then finally, and arguably most importantly, good partners. Nothing that BP has accomplished has been done by BP alone. Nothing that the countries have accomplished have been alone. It's a consortium. There's work with some of our best partners, SOCAR and the Azerbaijan government, and throughout the region. So with those 5 things, technical expertise, a business case, public-private cooperation, clear goals and mission, and good partners, I think we can tackle this transition just like we tackled some of the difficult problems in the past. And I'm glad to be able to sit up here and note that we in BP and so many others want to be and look forward to being a part of that.
Thanks, Bob. I think it's great, and I think it's also, again, important here at this point about we've done a lot, there's a lot to be done, but there's a basis there on which to act. I'd like to sort of shift things, and this is, again, for those of you who've done these panels before, and many of us have sort of all paneled on these things. We tend to think a lot about energy going west, but the major consumers these days are in the east. And so I'm very pleased to have Mr. Hisashi Inoue, who's Senior Representative of the Japan Bank for International Cooperation, JBIC, their office here, to talk now not about how we have to look at it on the western side, but how the world looks on the eastern side of Eurasia. Inoue-san.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. I'm Hisashi Inoue from Japan Bank for International Cooperation, Washington, D.C. office. So firstly, I'd like to offer my congratulations about 30 years relationship between the United States and Caspian countries. Actually, this year also Japan have the 30 years anniversary with U.S Caspian region. So I welcome your congratulations to Japan. So thanks. Thanks a lot. So we Japan, we JBIC are policy-based financial institutions fully owned by the Japanese government. And we offer several products, meaning that the energy security and the supporting Japanese companies' overseas business and environmental preservation and addressing the global financial crisis. Those are 4 components of our operations. And U.S. collaboration is the key component of operations. We have very good relationship with DFC as the same policy-based financial institutions. We signed a memorandum of understanding with DFC in 2017, and then that cooperation evolved into trilateral with inviting Australian guys. And also recently Quad evolved into Quad. So those 3 and 4 countries frequently discuss about how we can promote the free and open in the Pacific region and beyond, including Caspian region as well. So, and today's topic is about the energy. And we JBIC offer several types of financial products to support the carbon neutrality of each country. Number 1 is about green finance to support renewable projects like solar and wind. And on the other hand, we have the other products, transition finance to support the transition period of each country. So for instance, recently we have very good discussion with the government of Uzbekistan. And last month, we received the Deputy Prime Minister Umurzakhov to our headquarters and discuss about their energy policy toward 2050. And we find the commitment, and we understand they need the certain period of transition from out-of-fashioned coal-fired power plant to the most recent type of gas-fired power plant. So currently, Japanese famous companies Sojitz, Kyuden, and together with French EDF and Qatar Nefres are discussing intensively about the new gas-fired power plant in Uzbekistan. So we are welcome to support this kind of project as well. So as the ambassador kindly mentions, we recently faced the crisis of energy security in Northeast region due to the Russian invasion to Ukraine. So we have several natural gas imports from Russia, but it's at stake. So we need the diversification of energy import other than Russia. So in this regard, Caspian region will be a good hub to provide the sustainable energy supply, both west side and east side as well. So we would like to enhance the relationship. Japan would like to enhance the relationship with this region with cooperating private parties. So we are unique institutions. We are not aid institution to provide the private commercial-based finance to the project. So we have close relationship with private parties, including BP. BP is a long-term friend of mine. And I personally have the track records with cooperating BP in the Pacific regions project. So I'm very happy to be with you. So lastly, I'd like to put the importance of the collaboration between private and public side. So some of you may know, last month we had IMF World Bank meeting here in Washington, D.C., and IMF issued World Economic Outlook, latest version. It mentioned that the public debt increased a lot due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's 95% of GDP. It's 11% higher than before COVID. So it's difficult for each government to raise the fund single-handedly. So we have to introduce the private capital. So I like to be a kind of catalyst to invite the private capital to each project. So we would like to be a friend of this region and friend of private parties and friend of each government. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Inoue-san. That was very helpful. And I think again, one of the things that we often talk about when we look at energy in this part of the world, we've tended to focus a lot on gas reserves, oil reserves, getting it out of the ground. Well, how do you get it out of the ground? You need money, you need investment. And one of the factors, frankly, right now behind the shortfall in supply has been a lack of investment. So I think those comments on financing are very important. If I could turn now to my former colleague, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Energy Transition, Bob Eichhorn. Bob is an expert on electricity. He's worked in many of the countries of the region, and he is also the person probably best positioned that I know of to talk about where we go next, to move away from the hydrocarbons and look at the other aspects of the energy world. So, Bob?
Thank you very much, Bob, for the introduction, and for IFCAN and Caspian Policy Center for inviting me to be on this panel today. It's a special pleasure because it was a little over 30 years ago that Secretary Baker asked us to field teams to the new independent states. So here we were in the dead of winter in February 1992, and we didn't know what we were getting into, but we sent teams out to all the countries, including, I think in the initial round, we went to Armenia, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. And since that time, obviously, and we were concerned about the heating situation, the nuclear plant was out in Armenia and people were freezing to death. And so it was quite an interesting time in terms of, but the reception was incredibly warm and hospitable. And I think, since then, obviously, much has happened. The cooperation has grown over these 30 years to support the kinds of energy reforms and investment that are needed in the region, and to help countries, I think, deal with the new challenges. And clearly the challenge that we're in now is a game changer, right? It's a game changer, and it's going to be very important to work together to try to solve these challenges. And the energy transition and the development of clean energy is one of the biggest challenges that we know. From an energy security standpoint, from a sustainable development standpoint, and from a climate change standpoint. I was rereading the national determined commitments that the countries in the Caspian made to the COP26. And it's clear the countries endorsed that as well, and have set important goals to in that transition, generally from 15 to 30% of renewables. And obviously, it varies from country to country, especially because of the big hydro. So let me make a few points about looking ahead and where we go here in terms of the transition in electric power and renewables. Early stage, major hydro countries, obviously, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan in particular, still investment in more potential there, but obviously they're trying to diversify. Obviously, the producers, oil and gas producers, et cetera, generate most of their electricity from gas, with Kazakhstan major coal production, that they want to reduce the dependence on coal. And that's extremely important from the standpoint of overall emissions in the Caspian region, because they're such a large in Caspian is not insignificant. The total generation in the Caspian is about equivalent to Spain. Okay, and in terms of renewables, you've got about 24,000 megawatts, mainly hydro, but beginnings of solar and wind. 13% solar, 5% wind in 2021. In terms of install capacity. So that mix is going to change dramatically, as we've seen in other parts of the world over the next decade. And I think that's the big challenge, is how to facilitate that transition. So in terms of priorities looking ahead, there are some I want to highlight here just briefly, because I don't have time to go into much depth. from my experience in looking at it over the years, the water resource management is really important for both upstream and downstream. And I think that will come out more perhaps in the second panel on food security, because it's so critical to food security as well as energy security. And climate change is having an enormous impact on that system. And so I think that's going to be a critical area. I remember we sent a cable to the field in the 90s asking posts, what were your priorities? This was Central Asian focused. Almost uniformly, the post came back and said water issues from both an economic and a political aspect. So I think that's going to be a key area to focus on. The good news, of course, is we've said huge renewable energy potential. Not only hydro, but solar and wind are excellent resources. Not quite like Saudi Arabia, but it's quite excellent. And so they can move in that direction. And I think we're seeing more and more interest in investment. But I mean, obviously, the international banks and agencies like in Japan have been very critical to that thing. I mean, Kazakhstan, for instance, EBRD has spent over $500 million on solar, wind, and hydro projects in the last few years. So, but it started, well, a couple of years ago, we were starting mainly 50, 100 megawatt projects. Now we're up to over 200 megawatt projects, and more capital coming in. Of course, notably, Masdar from UAE and ACWA from Saudi have been major investments in looking at these big countries. And also China, of course, has been investing too in renewables. So countries are working on policy regulatory environment. We're helping through our aid technical assistance programs and others to try to improve the environment. Countries have moved toward auctions, more transparent auctions, and development of the independent power and private power agreements. Uzbekistan did 16 in 2020. But U.S. company participation has been almost nil. We've got to deal with that. We've got to sort of try to say, what are the obstacles that are keeping U.S. companies that are investing so much in other regions of the world in this area from investing in the Caspian? Not uniformly true. I mean, we've seen major investments like Contour Global for the hydro in Armenia, very important. Along with renewables, transmission development. And we all know how important that is to integrate renewables and to have a reliable, resilient system. Energy storage is going to be critical in that process. And here I think that there is the potential not only to better use the hydro and the gas to provide flexible systems, but also hydrogen will be, I think, important in the coming years. So we're seeing more hydrogen interest in the region, both in terms of pipeline blending as well as in terms of potential use of hydrogen to replace gas in combined cycles. And I think from that standpoint, regional electricity cooperation has been a long-standing focus of what we've been trying to do with, from the U.S. standpoint as well as with other donors and IFIs. And that that, as Amos said, that we really need to sort of focus on how do we strengthen that regional electricity network in both sub-regions. I remember one of the things that was done that was important was the U.S. worked with EU, EBRD, KfW, and others in terms of financing the high voltage interconnector back-to-back between Georgia and Turkey. And that allowed, and since the development of export potential to the market that was integrated with the EU electricity systems, ENTSO-E, and allowed a bridge between Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey to develop on the electricity side, paralleling to some extent the gas and oil pipelines. And finally, last but not least, and I've been sort of drawn out of retirement to work on this issue, frankly, is that an initiative that is being developed under the Power Central Asia Aid Project, is a $39 million project, is to develop an American Innovation Center for Central Asia. And the idea is that, in a sense, given all the tremendous technology that the U.S. is developing in the clean energy space, that there's potential for partnerships in this region and that can expose countries to the technology and allow U.S. companies to look at trying to develop a niche in these markets. And so this is, I'm working with Tetra Tech, which is implementing the broader aid project. And we issued a solicitation, expressions of interest recently, and I'm happy to talk to the interested parties more about how they could be involved in this. But I think that builds on what Amos was saying, that we need that kind of effort to try to support our companies and in terms of their development of these kinds of innovative partnerships in the region. So I'll stop there, Bill.
Thanks, Bob. That's great. And I'd like to turn now to Mr. Samir Karimli, who's advisor to the president of SOCAR. I think we've all been talking about the region. Now it's time to hear from the region. So, Samir, turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much for Caspian Policy Center to arranging this event. But Bob Scher did a fun part of the speech as a private company, and he left boring part of the speech as a state company for me. So, State Oil Company of Azerbaijan, SOCAR, plays a very important role in both regional and global energy markets. Through projects that are developed within the international partners, SOCAR is making vital contribution to European energy security. It's well positioned to continue to do more in coming years in this regard. United States and Azerbaijan energy cooperation has been essential in realizing mega projects such as Baku-Tiflis-Ceyhan oil pipeline and South Gas Corridor projects. Azerbaijan is rich in oil and gas resources, as it holds 7 billion barrels of proven oil and around 2.6 trillion cubic meters of natural gas reserves. After independence of Azerbaijan, SOCAR's main strategy was developing its energy resources by attracting foreign direct investment from big Western companies and diversification of its export routes. Today, Azerbaijan has 7 oil and gas export routes. Among them, Ptc is the main oil export pipeline that carries oil from Baku to Caspian, Turkish Mediterranean port of Ceyhan. On the other hand, Southern Gas Corridor is the main gas export pipeline system that delivers natural gas from Shah Deniz field in the Caspian to Italy in Europe. Ptc Pipeline came to realization as a result of the Contract of the Century agreement signed on September 20, 1994 under the leadership of President Haydar Aliyev. This agreement opened the doors of the Caspian resources to global energy players. Since the signing of the first profit-sharing agreement in 1994, the largest oil field of Azerbaijan, ACG, has attracted more than $41 billion of investment and produced more than 4 billion barrels of oil and around 200 billion cubic meters of the natural gas. After successful development of its oil resources, SOCAR moved to develop its gas resources. Shah Deniz gas field, which is about the same size as Manhattan, is one of the largest natural gas fields in the world. It has 1.2 trillion cubic meter of natural gas and around 2.2 billion barrel of condensate. The first phase was commissioned in 2016. Since then, Azerbaijan started to produce around 10 BCM of natural gas, and that helped Azerbaijan to transform from gas importing country to a gas exporting country, and we started to export gas to Georgia and Turkey via the Baku-Tiflis-Erzurum gas pipeline. The second phase of the shut-in, which was the main and biggest one, developed under the framework of Southern Gas Corridor, and it commissioned in June 2018. Since then, the production of the field is ramping up every year, and between 2017 and 2021, the production ramped up to more than 120%. And now in 2021, total production of the shut-ins was around 23 billion cubic meter of the gas. The Southern Gas Corridor project aims to increase and diversify European energy supply by bringing gas resources from Caspian Sea to European markets. It's one of the largest natural gas projects in the world in terms of investment, costs, technical features, multinational participation as of 7 countries, 13 companies, and the total value of the value chain was around $40 billion. So the project is contributing to the energy security of Europe by providing both supply and route diversification. Today, many regions in the world, including Europe, are implementing an environmental-friendly energy transition strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We see natural gas as a sustainable transition fuel for achieving this strategy. Even if European gas demand stays flat, due to domestic production decline, its import dependency is increasing every year. Decision on cutting financial sources for any new hydrocarbon development are also not helpful. Current realities need to be taken into consideration. Sustainable and reliable suppliers like SOCAR should be supported and encouraged for new investments, especially in gas area. In last decade, European Union gas production decreased 3 times. Just in 2021, it decreased around 8%. And this trend is expected to continue in the coming years. For example, the largest natural gas field of Groningen is expected to stop next year. Furthermore, in 2021, natural gas demand of European Union increased 4.3% comparing to 2020. Today, Europe's energy dependency on natural gas import reached around 83%. This trend is expected to continue, which increases the role of alternative gas sources and routes for European Union. In this context, United States LNG exports as well as Southern Gas Corridor are vital for energy supply security of Europe. Although South Gas Corridor ends in Italy, it will be able to reach almost every part of the Europe by interconnectors. Since TAP connects to Italian natural gas grid, from there it will be able to reach almost all European destinations in the future. By using swaps, reverse flows, South Gas Corridor can reach to Central European largest energy hub, Baumgarten in Austria, via Trans-Austria gas pipeline, and we will also supply gas to Bulgaria and Romania through Greece-Bulgaria-Romania interconnector. Given that there's an existing pipeline between Romania and Hungary, in the future Hungary can also import natural gas through the SGC. Moreover, the Caspian gas also will be able to flow to Balkans through the Ionic Adriatic pipeline. Since the commissioning of the TAP pipeline, more than 10 billion cubic meter of the Azeri gas has been transported to Europe. Also this year, another 10.5 billion cubic meter of gas is estimated to be transferred to Europe. Currently, delivery capacity of TANAP and TAP gas pipelines can be doubled by additional compressor stations. In addition to Azeri gas, Central Asian, Middle Eastern, and East Mediterranean gas also can be transported through South Gas Corridor infrastructure, as it's the most feasible route for reaching EU market. And in the future, SGC system can also be used to transfer hydrogen to European markets. To summarize, South Gas Corridor provides supply and route diversification for Europe, while contributing energy transition strategy for the EU. Today, we can proudly say that SOCAR has transformed itself into one of the regional and global energy players with international investments, including in Ukraine, Romania, Turkey, Georgia, Switzerland, Austria, and other countries. We look forward to contribute European energy security by being reliable and sustainable energy partner. Thank you for your time and kind attention, and sorry for a maybe boring speech comparing to Bob shares.
That's good. Okay, well, thank you so much, Samir. And I'd like to open it up now to the floor. I'm kind of at a disadvantage here, this one corner, and so if I'm not seeing you raising your hand, be aggressive. Please, over here. Oh, and please, two things I want to say to begin with. This is being recorded and will be posted later, so watch what you say. Second thing, I'm a New Yorker, I understand this. Second thing is, please, questions as questions. As a German speaker, no German speeches. Please.
My name is Peter Humphrey. I'm an intelligence analyst and a former diplomat. I look at the United Arab Emirates as a place that could run out of oil tomorrow morning and still have a very viable economy because of the investments it's made over the last 2 generations. I look to the Caspian Sea area, and I look 2 or 3 generations down the road, and I see disaster. So I'm wondering if we couldn't put a hell of a lot more energy into the parallel economies of these states to make sure they are themselves viable at the end of this century.
I'm not sure, anybody, I don't know, Samir is Azerbaijani, you may be the lucky person on this. If you don't, maybe I'll make a comment, having been ambassador there, but want to go first? Or Bob too, also in terms of Bob Eichhorn. Yeah.
Should I reply?
If you got a little bit, if you want to. This is
like, as we mention always, the energy resources of the Caspian Sea is needed in the global energy market. And that's why we would say the Azerbaijan has maybe the best case working together its international partners, and it's with United States and EU partners to bringing all these sources to the international markets, and as environmentally and as economically, together with PP, we have achieved a lot of very good goals, and also we have almost zero flaring strategy in the Caspian.
any other comments on the gang here?
Well, I just think the transition, the key issue is that you've got this commitment, and now there needs to be action and financing to achieve 30% renewables in the by 2030. That would be an enormous achievement if these countries could do that and begin to reduce that dependence. At the same time, there's lots of gas, and I think gas is going to be important to help them make that transition. And so I think that in some cases, yes, there is overdependence on hydro too, and I'm concerned that the threat to the hydro resources may have serious implications that really will force some of the hydro states to also try to diversify and not be so reliant on that single source. So it varies from country to country in terms of the challenge, but I wouldn't say that there's not a realization that they should make these major transitions.
Yeah, I would sort of say in a more macro sense, from my own experience, I've often said, well, my first conversation with President Leaf after I presented my credentials was entirely on economic diversification. Now, the problem is actually doing it and carrying it forward. But I think this is all, these are factors which are very much sort of seen by these governments. And I think something which, again, the United States, like there are a number of people in this room from USAID, has been trying to sort of help. I think for all of us, I think that's really sort of the key thing here is not just where we've been, but where we're going. And there's cities in the United States that have been traumatized by the shifts in the energy industry over the years. So I think there's areas we can work on together. Other questions? Look. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Lou Coffey. I'm the director of the Foreign Policy Center at the Heritage Foundation, and I'm also a member of the board of CPC. My question is specifically for the Deputy Assistant Secretary Lockman. What initiatives or what actions have been taken, might be taken, could be taken in the future to put as much enthusiasm from the U.S. government on hypothetical Trans-Caspian gas pipeline as we saw in the 1990s with regional energy projects like Ptc? It seems like now is the time to do this. We have a Caspian agreement. We have one of the main actors in the region that would oppose such an interconnector is becoming weaker by the day. And Europe needs more gas. And Turkmenistan needs new markets. So what can we do? What can the U.S. government do to encourage this and to push this initiative along? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Definitely Europe needs supply to replace what they have been buying from Russia. And so this is something that we are working very closely with the Europeans on right now. And you may have seen our March 25th statement, US-EU heads of state signed and creating a task force to look particularly at LNG and then the energy transition issues. And on the LNG side, with a commitment from the US side through our own domestic suppliers, as well as working with international suppliers to get 15 BCM this year to the European countries and working that up to about 50 by 2030. Obviously, piped gas is another option for Europe, and the Commission and the individual member states are reaching out as we speak to various potential suppliers. And the Caspian is one of those regions that they're looking towards. In particular, I know in Southeastern Europe, they're very interested in getting additional regional, Caspian regional gas to that part of Europe. So to the extent that we can help in that regard, if there's U.S. companies involved, we also have the balance that we have to hit in terms of building out new technologies and infrastructure that is related to the energy transition at the same time as we're working on energy security. So clearly, we do recognize gas will be part of this transition. The key is to try to focus on projects where you have methane abatement involved, where you're reducing the emissions of that use of gas. And so the U.S. government would be particularly interested in collaborating on projects like those.
Thank you. Dr. Cohen?
R.L. Cohen, the Atlantic Council. Yeah, hi. we're talking about volumes, the scarcity of volumes of gas for Europe. And at the eastern side of the Caspian, there's a lot of gas. It's Turkmenistan. There's a new president. What is the state of play vis-a-vis Turkmen gas? Can we get Turkmen gas into Taptanap? Where's China in that? And should we even bother to think about it? Thanks.
I think
Maybe that's for SOCAR and
Not for me, for you guys. we declared always that we have infrastructure. We established, in my speech I mentioned, we can double the capacity of our infrastructure. If any countries would like to bring more product to our infrastructure, we are always welcome to use our infrastructure to transit gas. And also with the BTC, as you know, when it was built in 1990s, it was also expected to carry more volumes from the Caspian. So for oil and for the gas products, Azerbaijan and SOCAR is always willing to carry extra volumes. We are open, but it depends on the.
And
I think this question mainly
for
you and for lady.
SOCAR clearly leads in the marketing of the gas. I just know that I talk to people who are smarter than I am on the technical pieces and probably smarter than I am on many other things. But while there's an ability to expand some of the infrastructure, there are limits without a lot of infrastructure investment, right? There's not a lot of excess capacity without some infrastructure, compression station, other pieces. Not that it's impossible, but it also is not immediate, and you have to put a lot of other commercial factors involved if it's to be a commercially viable piece. That's not to say that governments cannot and investment banks and others cannot help with that. But so it's certainly something that's possible, and as we all know, and Dick Morningstar I think is alive and well, but he always has joked about the ability of Turkmen gas to get into the Southern Gas Corridor, and let's see if we can keep him alive and well and see if there are other opportunities.
And if I could just add one thing as well, clearly there has to be a strong demand signal for those types of investments to be made. And this is a point in our conversation, as well as the U.S. government with the Europeans, and from our companies with European governments and companies, is that we need that strong demand signal in order to make investments in the U.S. as well, to increase our capacity to produce LNG. So it would apply in this case too.
So I'd like to add one thing. So sometimes project in developing countries faces the lack of capital about the project preparation. So in that case, MDB has the tool to support, and also we, Japan, and the United States have this toolkit to support. So we can offer the kind of project preparation toolkit to promote the lack of investment in the region, I think.
Thank you. Other questions? We'll start with you, and then the gentleman next to you.
Good afternoon. Hamdi Rafai, MOS Strategies. I wonder what the barriers are. Can we just elaborate on what the barriers are to Azerbaijan using energy to create peace with Armenia in terms of maybe energy trade, energy for land, and get Han Kendi off the table? I doubt there was any prospect in the past, but now we've seen Russia clearly be an unreliable energy partner, and I can't help but wonder if Armenia is feeling that as well now.
Maybe I'll take a stab at that one, and others can chime in and correct me. But I think in the early days, there really was a desire to try to build the pipeline actually through Armenia, sort of connect that. That did not work politically. The situation right now in terms of Azerbaijan and Armenia moving forward, and the Armenian foreign minister has been in Washington the last couple of days. Azerbaijan has set out principles for a peace agreement. Armenia's talking about this. They're trying to move forward. I think that there are a couple of things. One is, when you talk about land for so forth, I don't think that there's any chance, frankly, of any sort of land swaps. The territorial integrity to both countries is too important, and not just to the government, to the people on the street. And I think one of the things which we also need to recognize is that it's been 30 plus years of hostility between both countries. And so when both those countries, basically about 2/3 of the population was born in 1990 or later, they don't remember anything other than a hostile environment. So it's going to take a while to sort of work through that. But there are things where, as I think, and I don't know if Samir can help me on this, but as I recall, there actually have been shipments of gas through Azerbaijan to Armenia. Certainly, some of the work on grids might be possible, although they're not synchronized necessarily the right way. I think Armenia is synchronized to Iran. That would be another set of problems. But I think you do put your finger on an important point, which is trying to find connections between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and Armenia and Turkey as well. To start integrating Armenia into the region for political reasons, other reasons. Armenia, in a way, has been sort of isolated from its neighbors. It really is, Georgia in the north, Iran on the south. Iran's certainly problematic for other reasons. But I think there may be ways to try finding those connections, economic, transport, academic, to sort of build up, communication between the two sides and so forth. I know the people in this room have worked on track 2 type things like that, but it may be keying too much on your point about for the land, but I think there are ways that this could be tried to be moved forward. I think this is something that right now, with the desire from both Armenia and Azerbaijan to try to move forward, not have a repeat of the war. I think I'm no longer in the government, so I can say this. I think the United States can do more to try to help bring them together. But that may be more the way to try to do that. That's it. Next question, please.
Connor Clark, National Defense University. Feel free, since this is a broad question, to drill down to a specific example you might have worked with. But I'd like to ask what you can say about the needs for and role of anti-corruption initiatives. I'm wondering either about standards that you've seen are tried and replicable, or some novel idea that's theoretically doable. And I'm wondering, again, broad brush, when you think of anti-corruption standards, is it more important that they be regionally consistent, or is tailoring them to their specific country or even a locality more important?
Anyway, son?
So, about the anti-corruption issue, I'd like to introduce you about the recent U.S.-Japan Australian cooperation. The name is Blue Dot Network, BDN. We call it BDN. So BDN is the kind of certification mechanism to provide a certification to individual project, and check each project satisfy the 10 standards, including anti-corruption and social good and environmentally good. There are 10 standards. So by providing this type of certification, we try to induce the private project into the betterment. So this is the kind of example of how we, Japan, the United States, and Australia do. It's currently under construction. We would like to launch the actual Blue Dot Network mechanism as soon as possible.
Yeah. Dr. Eckert?
One of the areas that's been a priority of the assistance activities and partnership activities has been to try to develop professional, competent, transparent energy regulators. And we've had partnerships between the NARUC and different state commissions in the U.S. and the new regulators that we've been involved over time in developing in a lot of the countries. Not all the countries have that yet, but in a sense, and I think from that standpoint, that's one aspect of transparency and working on charter of accounts, kinds of things that would allow more transparency into the energy sector. At the same time, as I said, working on auctions and ways of increasing the transparency in the procurement process for major projects and disbursements. And here, the work of the banks together is really important because they're providing these hundreds of millions of dollars of loans, and it's really important that the accounting systems of these utilities and others are up to speed in terms of accountability.
He did a fantastic job.
But one thing I would sort of add on that is I know in the past, when I was at ENR, one of my jobs was actually sort of working on this front in terms of the legal framework for the energy sector. And particularly, we were looking at countries that were sort of new to the energy patch, trying to get them to get their laws up to international standards, if I can put it that way, but with the idea of increasing transparency and fighting corruption. We were also active at EITI, which I'm not sure where we stand now with the administration. That was an earlier administration.
But we are still active, yes.
And so that's another way to kind of make this forward. And it's basically, I think, often part of an ambassador's brief in these countries to be fighting this. Because you're right, I mean, corruption really kills the business environment. And so the steps which can be taken to improve, to fight that are really absolutely totally necessary. I think we have time for one more question, sir.
Thank you all so much. Oh, this question is for Assistant Secretary Lockman with methane. So given that Russia joined the Global Methane Initiative in 2014 and by some measurements is one of the world's, many measurements, largest emitters of methane, do you expect cooperation in this regard to continue, or given the outbreak of hostilities, do you think that will cease?
We certainly hope that efforts along those lines will continue in Russia. I mean, this is a global imperative, and we've all signed on to commitments and goals, and we need to keep moving in that direction. So we definitely will be encouraging and hope for continued strong engagement.
And thank you for your work in methane mitigation.
I mean, both as Deputy Assistant Secretary Luckman said, it's both good. It's good for the environment, which care about it. It also is, it's good for business.
Yeah. Well, with that, I think we have to move ahead. Thank you all very much for your attention. I think we're taking a 15-minute break.
You've made a lot of progress on the gas front.
Take a short break and be back in 15 minutes. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. We will start the next panel. So if you would all please take your seats and turn the floor over to me, we will begin. We have a panel of 3 experts presenting different points of view, which I think you'll find very interesting. To my immediate right is Emil Majidov, Special Advisor to the Minister of Economy of Azerbaijan. Then Yelena Son, Executive Director of how many? 4? 3
plus 1.
3 plus 1 business councils dealing with countries in Central Asia. And then Paul Trupo, who is the Senior Director for Global Market Analysis of the Foreign Agricultural Service, USDA. Truth in Advertising, I worked for the Foreign Agricultural Service for 32 years. I was a Foreign Service officer, and I also worked for 2 other foreign affairs agencies over my career. I started out with the U.S. Information Agency, as did Laura Kennedy. We were exhibit guides for USIA, then went to USDA, and I finished up my career after being kidnapped by the Department of State to be ambassador in Turkmenistan. In looking at this panel, when we first thought of doing a panel on agriculture and agribusiness, we were thinking in very broad terms and thinking in terms of what's agriculture going to look like in the South Caucasus and Central Asia in 10 or 20 years. what are the sorts of reforms that we need, what are the types of technologies that the companies and the business councils can offer to help make transitions to a new type of agriculture. Events over the last couple of months have kind of thrown a wrench into that point of view because there are some near-term issues that we really need to look at so that we can then, once we've solved them, move on to looking at the longer term, 10, 20 years from now. And I think you all know what I'm talking about. If you look at Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan put together, they're called the Black Sea region, the Black Sea wheat production region, and they account for 29% of world production of wheat. I don't need to tell you what's going on in the Black Sea these days and why exports of wheat from the region have been disrupted, why planting of wheat in Ukraine has been disrupted, as well as corn, as well as sunflower. So we have some near-term concerns in both Central Asia and the South Caucasus because those countries have relied historically on Russia and Kazakhstan and Ukraine for basic staple foodstuffs, vegetable oil from sunflower seed and flour for producing bread from wheat. So as I looked at this panel, I started thinking, okay, what am I going to talk about? And I realized I actually have more questions than I have answers. One of the questions is, what is the impact of the war in Ukraine on the availability of staple foods in the Caspian region? What can the Caspian countries and other countries, for example, the United States, do to ensure food security in the region? What is the impact of the war in Ukraine on availability of motor fuels, such as diesel fuel, which is necessary for operating farm equipment? And Russia is a major exporter of diesel fuel to the region, about 2.6 million tons of diesel fuel per year. Russia and Belarus are top producers of fertilizers. Russia is the single largest producer of nitrogen fertilizers in the world. Belarus is about number 2 in potash. And these are inputs that are needed throughout the region for food production. What's going to happen with those? Kazakhstan is the single largest food producer in the region, in the Caspian region. Where is it going to source its diesel fuel and its fertilizers? Is China an alternate source of fertilizer and spare parts? And is Turkmenistan going to be available as a supplier, an alternative supplier of motor fuels and lubricants for farm equipment? Then there are the broader issues, and I think we will have time, I hope, to get into those. So I would ask the panelists to think about the broader issues, because here we are at the 30th anniversary of diplomatic recognition of all of these countries and the United States, 30 years plus of independence. I think it would be a mistake not to look 30 years out and say, what's out there? What should we be thinking about? The one issue that jumps off the page to me is water. If you read the World Bank's reports on water resources in the region, they predict, the analysts predict, the hydrologists predict, that glaciers in the Tian Shan will melt at a rate that will allow the flows of the Amu Darya and the Sur Darya to continue at their present rate until about the year 2050. About 30 years from now, they will go over a cliff. The glaciers will have melted and the flows of the Amu and Sur Darya, which all of you know are the major sources of water in Central Asia, will dry up. What does that portend for agriculture, for food security in Central Asia? And will there be similar impacts in the South Caucasus? Will we also see water supplies coming out of the Caucasus Mountains start to dry up? So those are the large questions that I think we need to discuss in this panel. So let's start. Emil?
Thank you, Ambassador.
Would you like to open?
Thank you, Ambassador. I think I'll continue the path that you set by trying to put the questions of agriculture and food safety into the wider context. I think that would be the right way to do it, to keep the audience interested. Azerbaijan this year economically is doing fine. The GDP growth so far is 6+%. We've done +5% last year, so we basically offset the post-pandemic crisis stage and are now developing at a good pace. The non-oil economy grows faster than the oil economy, which is basically, like say, at the plateau at the moment. Agriculture grows as well, and food production kept on growing for the last few years at a good pace. Our exports of agriculture and foodstuff is mostly going to the neighboring countries and consists mostly of fresh fruits and vegetables and hazelnuts to a certain extent. While we import grain, sugarcane, vegetable oils, and as Ambassador said, staple food type foodstuff more. That sets a certain context to where we are in this. Azerbaijan have been lucky because we produce almost anything you can think of, but we've been unlucky because almost in none of the positions we are self-sustainable. So in some positions we produce 50% of what we consume, in some 90%, but we still import lots of things, as well as export. All in all, our exports are usually half of what we import when it comes to food and agricultural products. So we are still dependent on what we import, and this is compensated largely by export of hydrocarbons, from which we make money to pay for the food that we buy. I assume, and it's my educated guess, and the following speakers may correct me, but I assume that the situation in most of the countries of the region is quite similar. And I also assume that in most of them, for example, Russia was a major exporter and importer when it comes to food and agriculture. That's a natural situation. Can you imagine you are a relatively small market and you have a huge market north of you that would suck in anything you can produce at a good price and good quality? And similarly, it can be a very convenient source for agricultural produce if you need one, because it has the scale and the size and the number of producers. So as a result, the problem that we are having now, that we need to sort out in the years to come, is to overcome the fact that neighbors, the Central Asian and Caucasian countries, are traditionally within 20% of our trade turnover. They're usually below that. And when it comes to food and agricultural product, it's even less. So we export and import, but we don't really trade much in food and agricultural products with our own neighbors in Central Asia and Caucasus. And that seems like a key thing to work on in the years to come. How do we do that? The work is going on. I believe that the understanding is there, and understanding is quite wide, because we feel these few processes that are going on. For example, the process that is happening within Turkey Council, that is becoming stronger and more important, and it becomes increasingly a regional organization with a number of countries joining in as observers, trying to be more active part of that, and so on. We in Azerbaijan, we also work heavily on deepening relations with Turkey, because they are both our most important trade partner and our most important political partner. So I'm sure that in the years to come, we will see the bottlenecks all these small obstacles to trade, all this red tape that is always somewhere there being taken out, and the trade between the two countries developing. The natural development to such trade would be Georgia and Armenia stepping into this format and becoming much more active in the trade and trying to be part of this trade space. But how it will work out, we will see. I mean, definitely the dynamic is good with Georgia. With Armenia, well, there are some statements. We'll see where we get with that. But today, for example, Azerbaijan have announced that it's going to establish 2 border crossings with Armenia. So that seems like a good signal. Seems like things are happening. But you know, I'm let's say modestly, well, relatively skeptical, because I believe that there's things that still need to be changed within Armenian political system for things to start moving in a really right direction. Again, you mentioned, well, the whole few last years felt like perfect storm. The pandemic impact that we had, and Azerbaijan felt it mostly through breakage of logistical ties. It's so much more difficult and time-consuming and expensive to bring in products from outside now for Azerbaijan, and we are landlocked, and this is our geographical destiny. We will, as a region and as a country, we will have to continue to work on our logistical ties if we want to remain economically competitive, regionally, globally, if we want to sustain our economy. So that's going to be there always, and it's been just made more difficult during the logistical crisis of the last 2-3 years. Now the war is in. It is a factor. Lots of logistics is now being reconsidered, and we have to remember that our part of the world is marked with lots of state borders, lots of crossings, lots of loading and unloading terminals. So Azerbaijan is by and large a multi-modular country from the transport point of view. So if you want to reach from Black Sea to Central Asia through Azerbaijan, you have to go through a Georgian port, then Azerbaijani port, then probably a Kazakhstani port. That makes lots of effort. That means a need for huge efficiency. And as I mentioned earlier, all of our countries are dependent on imports of foodstuff. So far, we've been quite efficient in fighting the current crisis. We created large inventories of food and produce staple food mostly. So 3 months inventory is what we have for most of the positions, and we keep on monitoring that both governmental and private storages have enough of it. And if the private sector runs out of food, we support them financially. We push them to keep the inventories in place. So far, we've been successful, but again, we have to be careful because the breakages in logistics are there, and there is also this process which we can call, national jealousy or competition. The countries fight for grain, they fight for sugar, they fight for vegetables, they compete with each other, they drive the prices up. Again, this also brings to the conclusion that we need a more regional cooperation, more regional coordination, because this competition for limited supplies and difficult logistics drives the prices up, but not necessarily sorts out the issue for any of us. I mean, so we have to be careful there as well. Water is something that we feel. We used to be quite, I'll be frank, quite reckless about the water resources that we had. We are in the South Caucasus, huge reserves in the north and in the large and small Caucasus. We never worried about it too much. But in the last years, what we get shortages. These shortages at the moment are regional and geographically contained. That's what we get almost every year. We didn't get them before. And we sort them out by redirecting water from one part of the country to another. But what we feel for the last 2-3 years is that we need a large long-term plan to fix it. The good news is we liberated approximately 15% of our water resources during the Karabakh War. Approximately 15% of our water was under occupation. Now it's free. But the whole infrastructure in that territory is demolished, so nothing there. For example, regions like Jabrail or Fizuli, despite the fact that they are near the water in Karabakh water sources, they physically don't have any water because all of the channels, all the artesians, all the water infrastructure was physically destroyed. We are now renovating that, and the impact of rebuilding of water management infrastructure in Western Azerbaijan will have a good positive impact both on production of agriculture produce in Azerbaijan and on efficiency of water management. But the factor is still there, and we will need to work smartly on that one. Increasing efficiency and doing smart investments. That's going to be the factor. And frankly, at certain stage, the issue of trans-border cooperation and working with your neighbors on water management resources is probably one of the topics that will be important and will be part of the large peace deal with Armenia. I don't want to continue because, as Ambassador rightly said, there are hundreds of questions that can, that make up this puzzle. But I think the efficient way would be to let on the other speakers and then come back into the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yelena, would you
Sure.
please?
I had to modify, I think, my remarks to kind of like to reflect this theme. And originally, I wanted to talk about the role that our trade associations play in Central Asia. But I think it's about securing U.S. interests, right, in working with Central Asian countries on agricultural and food security development and improvements. And it's always a tough act. I mean, being on this panel, it's always a tough act to speak after the ambassador and Emil, and having Paul here in the audience, who are truly experts on the issue and can speak at length. So I think that my remarks will be very short, and I'll provide the opportunity for the audience to pose more comments to them. As I was introduced, I run the American-Uzbekistan Chamber of Commerce, U.S. Kyrgyzstan Business Council, U.S. Tajikistan Business Council, and U.S. Afghanistan Business Initiative. So it's quite a wide coverage of Central Asia, and we are delighted to be here today to celebrate the regions, the broader regions, celebration of the 30th anniversary of their relations with the United States. Also, the celebration of their political and economic independence. And I think that I would like to say that one of the remarkable factors here is that one of my organizations, the American-Uzbekistan Chamber of Commerce, is going to celebrate its 30th anniversary actually in 2023. And that is to show that the U.S. has been in Central Asia, has been in Uzbekistan, particularly in this case, has been committed to working with their Central Asian nations on not only securing energy, as the previous panels spoke about, but also food, agriculture, education, healthcare, and many other sectors. The other two councils, the U.S. Kyrgyzstan and the U.S. Tajikistan Business Councils, are relatively new. They were both created in 2016, and again, at the initiative of major U.S. corporations who express interest in pursuing bilateral tracks. But I think what brought me today is the fact that we see a huge positive regional cooperation in Central Asia. And I think truly the region can be used as a model for other regions of the world to follow their footsteps. Who would have thought in 2016 or in 2015 that the region will be here represented at various levels? And just a few days ago, we hosted all Central Asian ambassadors for a discussion, and all expressed interest in collaborating as a region. And I think, again, that's something that is worth considering, especially when other parts of the world are more fragmented and prefer to work and not to work, but maybe compete with each other rather than just work collaboratively on generating benefits for their nations. Again, the reason why I'm here is because the framework of my conversation was to talk about U.S. Business Council's multiplying power to draw more vigorous attention to this very important part of the world and in strengthening the relations and the partnerships. And so we act, many view us not only as just a trade association or as a business group, and I'm sure many of you are members of these trade associations and other professional organizations, so I don't have to explain the benefits. The benefits are many, but I think that the strength of these organizations is in the people in the companies that we represent. And what we do is we are often referred to as the frontliners, the mobilizers, the advocacy organizers, and the influencers and the energizers. And I would like to kind of like review each of these aspects with you so that you have a better grasp as to why I'm here on this panel. I mean, I don't represent an agro company, but we do represent a group of agricultural companies. So our membership is diverse, and we represent the manufacturers, service providers, IT professionals, educators, financiers, and others. And again, the success is in the billboard of the companies that we represent. So we represent, unlike other organizations, we represent only US corporations, Fortune 100, Fortune 500, with a small group of small, medium enterprises who, again, are involved in various sectors in the healthcare. They're also investors in the agricultural industry, in the banking, and et cetera. And to name a few companies on the large scale, the companies that we represent are CNH Industrial, for instance, John Deere. We also represent one of the most famous American private investors in Central Asia, which is Silverleaf. We also represent Valmont on the irrigation side. So again, quite an impressive lineup of companies. All have been committed to the region and have been in pursuit of opportunities mutually beneficial. And I think that's where I will put a strong emphasis. Mutually beneficial opportunities with the Central Asian countries. We engage, the reason why we are the frontliners is because we engage with companies in the US, with the investors on a day-to-day basis. So practically, this is our base. This is where we operate. This is where we meet with companies and helping them identify opportunities, but mostly working with them on their perception of the challenges and the issues that exist and maybe overcoming and breaking the stereotypes that exist when it comes to Central Asia. So it's a lot of hand-holding, it's a lot of connections, it's a lot of networking that goes into that, and I think that the organization such as ours has a power of multiplying effect. So today we represent on the American Uzbekistan Chamber of Commerce, we represent 40 Fortune 100 and 500 companies, and again, most of them don't need any introduction. It's companies such as Visa, it's Boeing, it's Microsoft, and many, many others. So we're also, as I said, we are also mobilizers. And here I would like to begin by acknowledging an outstanding work of Central Asian officials here in the United States, but also in the region, for working with us and for providing their services and providing the expertise, providing their platform for us to plan, to help them legislate and execute reforms that are most likely to attract more American investors. And again, there is a huge collaboration and a huge level of understanding among the Central Asian officials as well as the nations that together they are much more attractive region. Together they are much more attractive play field for companies to consider, because companies look at the volume, they look at the capacity, and here you have a very strong, very dynamic, very young population that is certainly worth considering and worth being very aggressive when it comes to business initiatives. Just this March and April, we hosted high-level delegations from the region, and all of them wanted very high on the agenda was engagement with business community. And again, we applaud the interest. We understand that for each government, it's very important to have government-to-government discussions with their counterparts here in the United States. However, we appreciate their recognition and acknowledgement of the significant role of the American business, be it large or small, that play and that can help with the development of just to name a few, like food and agricultural development and security, kind of like aspects, elements, sectors of the economy. And again, we are delighted. I've been in this business for 11 years, and I'm just personally delighted to see the commitment from the region to working with companies and with other countries, not only with the U.S., as a region. I think, again, my appreciation and bravo to everybody here in the United States, Caspian Center and many other colleagues at the State Department and the Commerce for recognizing that and for pursuing such a productive level of negotiations. Another aspect that we do, and that's what we work on a day-to-day basis, is that we are advocacy organization. So we are advocacy mobilizers. There are, I mean, the previous panels and the questions that were asked, of course, they underline the important and the powerful geopolitical reasons for being involved in Central Asia. However, we are business. Our main focus is trade and investments. And for us, the way we treat it is that business benefits everyone, trade benefits everyone, investments benefit. It's a win-win for everyone. So, and nobody can ever say no to doing business with the neighbors, or be they the neighbors or the immediate neighbors or neighbors who are across the Atlantic. So we meet with companies, like I said, we meet with companies on a day-to-day basis, and I know that the ambassador has these discussions, and I'm hopeful to join one of your discussions, but every time we meet with companies, there are always something that we have on the agenda. It's either get more clarity from the US government on their policies, on their position, on the evolving right now environment, and it's not only the war in Ukraine, but also post-COVID revival. It's also the climate change. It's also the energy efficiency. It's also the fact that they have a very young, large population demographics that we need to create more jobs. And I think, again, this is where there is a full synchronization of our goals as an American society and as the group of Central Asian countries, is that we're here at this table or on this stage to identify opportunities that will create jobs here in the United States, create more stability and more prosperity for the American public, as well as for people in Central Asia. Again, and when it comes to food and agriculture and security elements, that's kind of like, I think it's a very compelling topic to discuss. We're also, on the advocacy side, I think that one of the, and I wouldn't call it as an issue or challenge, I always refer to them as questions. So in business, we have many questions. And we always encourage governments and on both sides of the Atlantic to be open to addressing those, to answering the questions. And if there is no answer to the question, then let's move on. Maybe there will be an answer that will be identified in a collaborative way. But I think that from the technical point of view, from the business point of view, sometimes the discussions they're focused or are concentrated around what is a bankable deal, right? So again, regardless of the sector, we always want to identify, because there are multiple stakeholders, for instance, involved, we always want to make sure that our lines, our values and our goals and objectives and the interests are all aligned. And so that's where most of the conversations are. What is the bankable deal for Central Asian nations? What is the bankable deal for companies in the US? What is the benefit for the American government to be involved, to provide financing, I don't know, to provide some level of expertise and support and advocacy support, for instance, for these bankable deals? And that's where kind of like, that's where the technicalities come up, and that's where we need to discuss, I mean, again, climate change, supply chain, tariffs, and all the other issues. And when it comes to the energizers, I think that the beauty of working with the business is that, especially business here in the United States, is business is always at the forefront of research and development. And so what I've seen personally by working for these organizations and business chambers is that business brings this degree of novelty and sophistication to a sector that is traditionally considered to be very conservative, where you have a tractor or combiner, a harvester, and there is nothing else beyond that. And we are breaking the stereotypes. So we just hosted, as a mobilizers and the energizers, we host on a weekly basis, and most of you have attended many of our webinars, on artificial intelligence, on bringing, again, more R&D into the agricultural sector, and how agricultural sector, for instance, views the use of this latest technology, the drones and everything else, for better exploration, for better productivity, GPS systems and the meteorological, for instance, applications for calculating the rainy days and the sunny days and the climate and et cetera, et cetera. So again, a lot goes into that, and companies, American companies are famous for being so innovative and for being leaders in innovation. And so it's a delight to be associated with such a strong driving force that helps break stereotypes of Central Asian nations. And I think that before I just conclude and pass the floor to Paul, we would like to emphasize that the agricultural sector and food security aspects, they require solid education and training. And it's not just agriculture by itself. It's not only about the farmers, but we're also talking about the banking industry. We're also talking about the academic industry, the education. We're talking about the IT development. We also talk about many other sectors. I mean, it's just social media also comes into play to encourage students to consider working in the industry. So logistics, of course, and the legal sector. So in other words, the region's agro sector is the byproduct. The way we looked at it is a byproduct of a well-established infrastructure, and it's a sector that is integrated into the fabric of the society, and that relies strongly on highly talented workforce. And I think that's where the message from us to the Central Asian countries is that, again, it's a very young region with high potential. And for business, be it in the United States or anywhere else, what matters is their talented workforce. And so our message is that we want young people, younger generations on both sides of the Atlantic to consider working in that sector in agriculture, and not to think about the agricultural sector in the old traditional kind of like mindsets, but be open to that. And so on that, I would like to close my remarks. And again, I'm here today, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Just because of the way we represent, I mean, we represent companies, we don't do business on behalf of these companies. We provide the platform, so if you have any questions, I'll be happy to address them after this panel. But without further ado, let's just stop here.
Thank you very much, Elena. Paul, the floor is yours.
Well, I'd like to thank the Policy Center, Ambassador Mustard, and my fellow panelists for this opportunity to speak to you all. My name is Paul Trupo. I work with the Department of Agriculture here in Washington. I want to talk a little bit about the global factors that are affecting food security in the Caspian region, but internationally. Food security truly is national security. We're in I don't want to say unprecedented time, but we're in a time of very high commodity and food prices, energy prices, but similar to what we had in 2008 and 2012. Now, if you remember, 2012 was the beginning of the Arab Spring, where many disgruntled citizens around the Middle East, but around the world, protested their displeasure with high food prices and economic hardship. Currently here in the United States, we have about 8% food inflation. And for those of you who live here, you constantly hear the grumblings and the complaints and blaming the government for high food prices when it's really a global issue. In the Caspian area, food inflation is twice as high. It's about 15% with much less disposable income. Here in the United States, food prices go up. We eat less steak and more hamburger. But for those who have less disposable income, spend more on food, really feel the economic hardship from rising food prices. So I'm going to talk some of the global factors that are affecting food prices in the region. Of course, we know, as Ambassador Mustard said, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Black Sea region, which is an extraordinary producer and exporter of wheat and vegetable oils and rapeseed meal, sunflower meal, oils, corn. As they say, they punch above their weight. They export a lot more than most countries, even larger producers. However, in the case of Russia, the There are no bans on exports of Russian food for humanitarian reasons, or no sanctions. Russian food, wheat primarily, and grains and vegetable oil, seem to be flowing. They have imposed on themselves some restrictions, export restrictions, in an effort to keep domestic prices low to appease the population. There are issues with vessels traveling the Black Sea. Some companies don't want to send their vessels or don't want to pay the higher insurance prices. So that's complicating some food getting out of Russia. And in the case of Ukraine, and there's also the issue of international financial transactions in the banks that even though Russia needs the foreign exchange and will likely make every effort it can to export its supplies, transacting in international payments is an issue. So there are factors affecting the supply coming out of Russia. In the case of Ukraine, prior to the war, about 75 to 78% of last year's harvest had already shipped. And the remaining 25% seems to be leaking out, either through Poland or Romania or some via the sea. But it's created an issue of in many cases, concern, speculation, worries about product in the near future, which just boosts the price. But it really seems to be an issue more of affordability than accessibility. I mean, the food is out there. The last few years, global production has been good. Production last year, even if Ukraine were to export zero, global production of grains and oilseeds was higher than the previous couple of years. But again, there's a lot of factors that are keeping prices high. So I'm going to just touch upon them. You know, coming out of the global pandemic, in the global economic recession, there's demand and economic activity has been very strong. We heard 5-6% growth. Globally, countries are growing much faster than many businesses and governments had anticipated. Typically, during a recession, trade of agricultural goods dips dramatically. Trade of all goods tends to go down. But during the pandemic-induced recession, trade of agricultural goods was robust, and it continued. Even with restaurant closures and lockdowns, agricultural trade was up. The last couple of years, consumption has outpaced production. Even though production has been good, this global demand has been strong. A lot of that is coming from China. China has a voracious appetite for agricultural commodities. China's share of global food imports has been rising every year, grew by 30% last year. So not typically a major importer of grain. They've started importing more grain. And it's putting pressure on the international prices. And as a consequence, stocks are low. And with low stocks, prices tend to remain strong. So there's just a couple of factors there. Energy prices. Agricultural commodities prices are correlated very highly with energy prices. You need oil and diesel, as the ambassador said, for planting, for harvesting, for processing, for transporting. So as oil prices remain strong, you can count on agricultural commodities to remain strong as well. There have been supply chain disruptions. Again, coming out of the pandemic, we've all heard about lack of computer chips in cars, manufactured goods, pharmaceuticals, all sorts of things. And these supply disruptions, the cost of containers have risen from $1,000 a container to $5,000. Backups in ports. So logistical supply chain issues globally are also another contributor to high prices. The cost of agricultural inputs, seed, machinery, land, chemicals, and in particular fertilizer. Even prior to the invasion, the price of fertilizer had tripled. Fertilizer tends to be produced in countries with large supplies of natural gas. As energy prices went up, fertilizer prices went up. That's a major, major issue for this coming harvest or this coming production season for agriculture. Many countries are concerned about their ability to acquire fertilizer. Typically, high prices, high commodity prices create a supply response. So in 2008, 2012, the following years, farmers around the world put lots of land into production, pumped their land full of fertilizer, got good yields, and the problem was resolved very quickly. This year, with the high cost of all the agricultural inputs, that's the big question. Are prices high enough, and is there an availability? So it's going to be a struggle. There's also concerns about drought and hot weather. South America's in the midst of a drought, and a lot of concern there, boosting prices. India's in the midst of a heat wave that's also has the potential to impact food supplies this year. And all that leads to sort of speculation. As commodity prices go up, investors buy into it, and then that sends prices even higher, and then more investors get into it, and something we need to keep an eye on. And then lastly, as a response, several countries want to do what they can to lower domestic prices, so they implement import or export bans or restrictions to keep food in their country. But all that really does is tighten the global supply for other countries. Argentina, well, to date, I believe 13 countries have imposed export restrictions. Argentina on soybean, meal, and oil. The big one, Indonesia, the world's largest supplier of vegetable oil, has imposed a restriction on the exports of palm oil. And that affects all vegetable oils globally, because they're all pretty much interchangeable, substitutable. And recently we heard that Kazakhstan has put a quota, understandably equal to historical export volumes, but a quota on wheat and flour exports. So that just makes markets jittery and keeps prices tight. So the Caspian region is not unique in that facing these food security needs, and they're not immune from the global trading system. The region is good at producing food and feeding itself, but historically it is a slight net importer overall of goods, with a high reliance on products that come from Russia and Ukraine. So that, again, will keep prices somewhat tight. The region imports fresh fruit, dairy, corn, soybean meal, fresh vegetables, and vegetable oil, all are which at extraordinarily high prices. So again, I guess just a little bit about potential remedies to the situation, and I'll wrap up and we can take some questions. What we can do is try to refrain from unjustified export restrictions. As I mentioned, some countries start hoarding or building stocks. As an effort to appease domestic audience, but just tightens things for everybody else. Governments need to think how they can shift to lower priced alternatives or local staples, or cheaper imports such as rice. The price of rice hasn't increased nearly as much as grains and wheat. Governments should do what they can to lower barriers to imports, such as reduce import tariffs, remove other restrictions. We've seen some countries drop their bans on genetically modified crops and lower their pesticide residue limits to allow product in that they usually try to keep out. Other countries are looking at ways of removing import quotas or import licensing, import certifications, or import inspections. These are all mechanisms that are in place primarily to protect domestic agriculture, but in times of high prices, anything that can be done to lower those barriers could have some beneficial outcomes. And the world needs to expand and diversify sources of fertilizer. It's really, domestic supplies are concentrated in a few countries, and it just leaves us very vulnerable to those countries. So the bottom line, we don't see any immediate relief in sight. The resolution to the war would have a mitigating effect, but would not solve the problem immediately. We need to keep the global trading system robust, nimble, and free of barriers. We're hoping for a great harvest this year, a supply response. If farmers can get their inputs, then we trust that they will be able to produce. And just lastly, we should think about this as an opportunity for farmers and rural producers in the region. The region has a high percentage of its labor force in agriculture and a fairly significant percentage of its GDP in agriculture. Well, with these high commodity prices, it's an opportunity sort of to transfer some of this wealth to the rural sector and to the farm community. So that's something. I mean, the worst thing we could do is put price controls on food in an effort to mitigate the global consumers to the detriment of the rural sectors. So we need to look at this as an opportunity to channel some of this wealth into the rural communities. And with that, Ambassador?
Thank you, Paul. That was a real tour de force. Thank you very much. We'll now open up for questions. So, Sebastian, you want to give Sebastian, tell them who you are.
Thank you. Sebastian Perroux, Central Asia Program, George Washington University. I mean, we've heard about food security issues in Central Asia for years, including Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and more recently in wealthier countries like Turkmenistan. We've heard for years about, and especially this last year, about a strong food inflation, prices. My question is, how could the US or other countries be more involved in helping Central Asian countries to work on their food security issues? What the US could do that has not been done yet, taking into account, of course, the very different context of each Central Asian, political and economic context of each Central Asian countries, and also taking into account the impact of Putin's war in Ukraine on Central Asia. Thank you.
Well, Azerbaijan is not Central Asia, but it's just across the water from Central Asia. Would you like to take a crack at saying what you think that the United States and other countries could do to help? Emil, please.
Yeah.
That hasn't been tried already.
Well, Central Asia and Caucasus, and we have to admit it, is still probably the least integrated region in the world into global economy. We have to admit it. But it's also an opportunity. As my colleagues from the panel said, large generation, large natural resources, big potential, lots of upside potential for development. I believe that U.S. business can find lots of regional opportunities for itself, in particular in looking into value-added production, processing type businesses in our part of the world. Because if you have offtake for what you produce, then basically you are into international business. And we, as you know, for example, the example of Azerbaijan, we produce fresh fruits and vegetables, and we obviously export them to neighboring countries because that's a natural thing to do. But if we switch into the longer value creating chain, for example, deep processing of food that could go elsewhere, faraway countries, that would work. But to achieve it, you need to create sort of a chain of elements and availability of finance for American business who wants to come to our part of the world, expertise support in order to create and to fit into this chain, helping some businesses grow to the level when they are able to engage in businesses like that. So it's like a long chain, but it's available and it's there. It can happen. We are flirting with projects like that all the time. You know, large corporations from states, they come, they do feasibility, they say, okay, we're almost there, but not this year, maybe in 2 years. Someone needs to push it to make it happen. And I'm quite sure that we are not that far from that. In Azerbaijan, we have, for example, another angle to that, is that we have a large chunk of lands that have been liberated, and they are now being put into agricultural turnover, into they are now becoming part of the economy. And there is a large upside for us, but we need investment there. If we want to develop it rapidly, we will need to pour in billions of dollars there. Yeah. And we will do that. But if we have international partners, we will do it faster. So, you know, there are angles, but there are things to do.
Good. Yelena, what do your businessmen tell you that could be done that's not been done yet?
I think with business, it's our commitment. And we're always in search of a solution. And if solution doesn't work, that doesn't mean that it doesn't work fundamentally. It means that we need to make tweaks to our model and to our approach in order to identify the best way to approach it. You're indeed right. I mean, food security and conversations about developing agriculture has been there for 30 years. And we would like to, again, to applaud the Central Asian governments to, first of all, look at the region, see how connected they are. And like Emil rightly mentioned, it's the least connected region with a huge interest in being connected, but the infrastructure is not there yet. And when it comes to agriculture, I think that in speaking with people on the ground, the perception is sometimes very traditional. It's fruits and vegetables. And then you start asking, well, how about feasibility study? And that's, I think, where from the business point of view, again, I spoke earlier about the bankable deals. I think different stakeholders have different timelines and have different expectations and level of investments. So for governments and for Central Asian nations, they want investments yesterday and today. For business, it's our calculation of the investments that we will generate in the months, years to come. For the community, for the world, for the global community, it's okay. How are these issues and the supply chain is going to affect me? And I think this is where the call, I think, to a larger community, not just only to the U.S., is very important, because food security is global. And like Paul mentioned, we need to make sure that the world collaborates with American companies and with each other and with Central Asian nations on not only identifying the opportunities. There is never a shortage of opportunities. What we need to go is go through every opportunity and see which one is bankable. Feasibility studies is one of the issues that we have. And this is where the US government probably can help with technical assistance to many private sector enterprises in Central Asia, because primarily agricultural sector is dominated by the private sector. It's less government involvement. But we need to make sure that they have the capacity not only to produce, but also to market, to package, to apply for loans, to apply for credit, so that they can expand they expand their operations. And I think this is where the banking industry comes in. And that's where the US private sector has been working with the multilateral development institutions, such as ADB, EBRD, IFC, and many others, identifying those opportunities and trying kind of like to understand what are the mechanisms, what are the resources that we can deploy right now in Central Asia that can help Central Asian countries to react more positively to the proposals of American companies. Again, if you look from the price point of view, American companies are not the cheapest. There is a certain price that comes with working with American companies. However, and this is a larger, again, picture, we are very transparent. So when countries want to address anti-corruption, the best way, again, and I've worked with companies, they're very transparent, they're very open. From the financial point of view, you have to comply with all the requirements. So that's where kind of like the business environment comes into play, improvements to the business environment. Banking, local banks should be more open to working with their agricultural companies in providing them the loans so that they can either purchase or lease. And going back to my regional cooperation, this is where we see a much more advanced understanding within the region that they don't need to have 5 factories producing the same agricultural equipment in every market. They realize that they need to establish their own supply chain within the region, where each one of them can be a critical component of the whole manufacturing industry. And so this is where it's a day-to-day conversations. And again, I think it's the level of expectations. Everybody expects companies to produce quick results. I think we don't want to rush here. And companies not always, it's not about the timeline, it's about the deliverable. It's about the quality, high quality product, high quality service that we can provide. And sometimes sitting in the audience and sitting outside of the region is very difficult to comprehend and maybe to appreciate all the challenges that each particular market deals with when it comes to the food. Again, it requires, the US is so many thousand miles away from the region. So what can we do? Travel. Luckily, the nations have removed most of the restrictions so we can travel. But the beauty of post-COVID environment is that we're always on Zoom. 9-hour difference, time difference, but we are discussing what can we do, what kind of financing can be provided for feasibility study, for, I don't know, for the trips to the United States. That's another thing. Okay. It comes to visas and for the farmers to have the funds to travel to the United States to look how things are done here.
Okay. Paul, I'd like to put a little twist on Sebastian's question. One of the things that Central Asia and just a lesser degree Azerbaijan are famous for is cotton production. And yet cotton is one of the thirstiest crops out there in an arid region where, as I mentioned, water supplies over the next 30 years are going to drop off tremendously. What, if anything, should we be doing to help a transition out of cotton and into food crops and higher value crops?
You don't want to answer your own question?
No.
I'm not sure I have the solution. From personal experience, I spent some time in Afghanistan following the war there, trying to do just that. Cotton and thirst for water into alternative food crops, and it's a challenge. I don't have any great answers. The United States government, instead of answering your question, I want to answer the question that I would have asked myself. What can we do to support the region? As the previous panel discussed on energy, it's creating an environment that attracts investment. A stable region with good rules of law and educated workforce and all is what attracts investment, and that's true for agriculture. Elena mentioned technical assistance, capacity building. We've tried that, and we continue to do that. We do have a lot of expertise. We have a number of programs throughout the U.S. government, State Department, AID, USDA. We try to work with countries to help develop their agricultural sector, realizing that a large percentage of the workforce is in agriculture, and it helps develop stability. We also work to keep the global trading system open and transparent for opportunities for cash crops and export. Talk about cotton. There's really just a few countries that dominate the cotton imports that spin yarn and manufacture textiles. So keeping that trading system open and transparent and operating properly, through the World Trade Organization is very important. And we also have an initiative on climate smart agriculture. I think agriculture contributes about 10%, I think, of global carbon emissions. So we're doing a lot of research and looking at ways and working with a number of countries to increase production in an environmentally low carbon, sustainable way. And we're always happy to include the Caspian region in that work. Sorry I don't have any answers on the...
I was counting on you for a panacea here, Paul. I'm sorry. Okay. Next question. Yes, sir. Can we get the mic over here? Yeah.
Thank you. Well, in the energy panel, we didn't talk about renewable applications in agriculture, but we're seeing that in more and more countries. And Emil, I was interested in your thoughts about that, given Azerbaijan's strong effort to develop renewable energy. Are you looking at that in terms of solar irrigation, crop drying, grain grinding, refrigeration for fisheries, and all the kinds of applications that we're seeing that are now becoming more economically viable with the drop in the cost of solar PV in particular?
Yeah, thank you. For us, it's an unfolding story. What we are trying to do, we have launched the process that we call smart villages, and we focus on this process again in the territory that have been liberated recently. So the whole development and infrastructure investment that happens in these territories goes under the umbrella of smart cities and smart villages. And the agricultural element is a key element to that, because it's obvious that we will be able to create sustainable communities in these territories through founding smart, modern agricultural projects. So the idea is to have the processing clusters regionally, and then lay out farms and agricultural smaller enterprises, family-based, community-based, village-based, and all of them connected through various smart solutions. Sustainable green energy being one of them. At the moment, it's mostly hydro and solar, but some wind projects have also been penciled, and we basically talk about large investments that have been announced by internationals. Some of them have been mentioned, Masdar, BP, large guys, but also subsidies and grants from the government directly to communities to turn their villages into smart ones. We've done one pilot already, smart village, so-called in Zangilan region, and we are doing the second one now. We learned from some mistakes that we've done, trying to do it better. I think it will unfold, but I think it's very important to keep the story flowing, to keep this development ongoing and learn as we go. Because obviously one thing is I keep on asking guys, what is smart? Well, how do we define that? How do we, and I get different
Not
answers.
stupid.
I think let's keep on asking. Let's keep on searching.
Okay, I'm told we have time for one more question. We have a question in the back.
Hamdi Rafai from MOS Strategies. I recently returned from Azerbaijan, from the territories, and I was shocked at the massive destruction. 7 hours of driving from Baku and nothing but destruction. Forgive me for my lack of imagination or cynicism, but I don't understand how these territories that Azerbaijan has liberated can be returned back to agriculture or to value-added manufacturing. I visited the area where it's designated for manufacturing or industrialization. I visited Shusha, which is designated as a smart city. And I think I walked the whole area in a matter of 10 minutes. It was that destroyed. And I guess I'm curious, what's the game plan? Is there a specific project, plan, schedule, anything to move this forward? Because when I saw Fuzili Airport, it was one airport with nothing around it for hours, but the remains of the looted buildings.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. A few towns have been fully destroyed, and hundreds of villages are non-existent anymore. But on the good side is the fact that Fuzuli Airport, where you've been, have been built together with the mining within the framework of 11 months. So from the moment when it was in the middle of battlefield that happened just a year ago to the moment when an international plane flew in and landed, 11 months passed, which I guess is an achievement, is a substantial achievement. We build roads and railways at the moment through the territories. We create the network of major roads in these territories. The speed is amazing. It's not easy to build in a place where there is no basically supply chain, electricity, water, or food, or population and lots of landmines. But the speed that is achieved there is substantial. The level of mobilization of workforce and contractors is very good. It's speculative because I don't remember the updated figures and they change all the time, but I would say that probably 20 to 30% of progress when it comes to major road network is there already, including major tunnels through mountains and large land works that require lots of time. And with railways, the progress is there. So what we are doing, we are connecting Baku to border with Armenia in Akbent village, which is the basis for future transport corridors in the region. They will change the face of the corridor. And we are building the second airport in Zangilan at a very high speed. What is going to happen in the next year, we will go into smaller projects. So instead of this large, arteria type projects, once we finish them, we will disperse into smaller infrastructural projects, creating villages and city centers, building critical infrastructure, building first social services, and laying foundations and creating the conditions for businesses to start moving in. The logic is quite clear. You have transport, and transport will feed construction. Construction requires construction materials, so lots of it will be sourced locally. As mobilization happens, you have to create services and local production that will drive the population moving into the territories. We will back it up with various financial incentives for people to move in. with some compensations for those people who were kicked out, for IDPs who want to return, for people who are not IDPs but who are looking for good job opportunities there. So it's a puzzle. We hired international consultants to help us solve the puzzle, large names, but we understand that the decisions and steps that we will have to take are going to be ours, and consultants will help, but we'll have to take lots of hard decisions to achieve it.
That's right.
Thank you.
Would you all please join me in a round of applause for the panel? Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone, for coming today. We are finishing the panel section of our event. We had very important topics to discuss. I think we covered the questions raised, and this was a very insightful comments from our panels on the energy and also on the agriculture and food security. With this, we have some light refreshments outside. Please enjoy it. And after the break at 6 p.m., we'll gather together for the gala dinner tonight. And I look forward to seeing many of you this evening again. Please check with my staff outside before the dinner portion. We can make sure that everyone who RSVP'd gets their meal up appropriately. Thank you so much. Thanks for being with us today. Thank you.